Hi, everyone. Welcome to the AA for our event tonight. To introduce this term's lecture series, Self-Organised, New Models for Learning, we first want to start off by saying thank you to our organisers and collaborators. My name is Sharvaree. This is Leela and Abhishek. We are diploma students here at the AA. We have co-organised this series with Francesco Zuddas, Francesca, Romana, Dell'Aglio, and Rory, Sherlock, supported by Manager, Borges, and Harriet Jennings. Can't see her. So this event series explores the multifaceted relations between institutional education and its many possible others that take the form of self-organised, collaborative models conceived and run by that vast, chaotic, and contradictory group that we call learners. Today's is the first event of what we hope to be a fruitful discussion that seeks to rethink the conventional modes of architectural education.
So this event is called Collective Efforts, Navigating Friction and Collaboration, and it aims to delve into the challenges of working together, questioning how perceived failures can be generative. In shifting focus toward the imperfect, incomplete, and intersectional, we want to encourage a deeper discussion of the possibilities of collaboration. We also hope that you'll join us next Thursday evening for our conversation on collaborative methodologies in architecture school. We're also organising a series of lunchtime peer reviews that will encourage individual students across the school to share their current work outside of the unit system. And finally, on February 17th, we will be designing and building a community garden for the AA, and we hope that you'll join us for this workshop. We're delighted to have with us today an incredible panel. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, Maria from Assemble and the Studio Low team will not be joining us.
Well, we have some amazing speakers for you guys. We have Mich, Rossiter, and Bruna Borges from Architecture Foundation's Young Trustees. Mich is a Part 1 architectural assistant at APT and a writer, and Bruna is a Part 2, but she's working as a building environment graduate in the public sector at the Department of Food, Environment, and Rural Affairs. The Young Trustees are appointed to platform issues that are important to young people in the industry, and they do this through events and participatory networks. We also have Martha Summers from HI-VIS. Martha Summers is an architect and artist living and working in London. And in 2016, she set up HI-VIS, a women and non-binary folks only collective based in London, which uses the tools of design for feminist action. We're also joined by Aude Tollo and Dell'Aglio from Patch Collective. Aude is interested in West African earth architecture, and she's also part of Matriarch Architecture Collective. We have Ella, who's an interdisciplinary designer interested in DIY music culture. She works with Beep Studios, practice based in Southeast London, who work with community groups to build music and art venues. And she also runs a sound system called Tenem Sound. They are both part of Patch Collective, which emerged from the New Architecture Writers Program in 2020. They're friends and spatial practitioners curating informal and welcoming spaces for conversations across the city. And finally, we're joined by Andreas from Public Works. Public Works is a non-for-profit critical design practice set up in 2004, working across architecture, art, and performance. He's also the course leader of the MArch architecture course at Central St. Martin's. He's also the placemaking lead across CSM. As you know, they do a lot of stuff. So we're very excited that they also joined us to do some more stuff and explain to you guys about some of the stuff they do. So thank you everyone for coming and joining us. Maybe we can give them,
So please also help yourself to the food and drink on the table, and please join the table for the discussion. So we want tonight to be a collaborative event in itself, so we want everyone to take part.
Yeah, we have some space over here if you guys want to sit down as well. And Ingrid is very nice. You can sit next to her. she won't bite.
So we'll first hear from Young Trustees.
Thank you so much for having us. My name's Mich.
And I'm Bruna.
And we're 2 of the 12 Young Trustees of the Architecture Foundation. We're a collective of architecture workers working sometimes in practice, sometimes in curation, sometimes in engagement, sometimes in the public sector. And we champion emerging and underrepresented voices in the built environment through a series of talks and tours and campaigns for things that we think aren't being talked about. We were founded in 2016, 2015, I believe, and we sit kind of adjacent to the Architecture Foundation, but not within it. So we have a bit more flexibility and agency. And the word young is very loose, so it's more youngish trustees. So this is us actually 2 days ago at our monthly meeting. You'll notice Lola, which is Katie's dog, the 13th young trustee. If you go to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I thought that was a microphone. Thank you. So this is our manifesto that we put together a couple of years ago. And the reason why that was important was to kind of condense what everyone believed the young trustees could be. We each have 2-year tenures. So every time the group refreshes, we can want to do different things and maybe diverge. So this is our current manifesto.
One thing that I was going to say about this is how it's such a good image to reflect how we actually work, because when we were asked to describe how we work, it's a very hard question to answer, but I think this really encompasses it. It's like it looks a bit chaotic. It's like a cloud of thoughts, and it's usually how we start our conversations. Everyone contributes their little bit, and we ask questions that sort of cross between the discussion, and slowly we kind of edit it out. And sometimes there is an end product that looks formal when someone has to, finish it up on the publisher or something, or it's usually Sean who does a lot of our lovely graphics, but it doesn't always have an end product. Sometimes it just becomes an idea that then leads to a work stream or becomes the next workshop in a work stream. The way that we're structured, I think based off this picture, you can probably tell it's mostly non-hierarchical, although we do need hierarchy for things like day-to-day decisions and responding to emails and the more practical side of actually running the work that we do. I think that the way that we run the work streams is fragmented, and it's based on capacity and interest, and we decide that sort of regularly during our meetings. We kind of check up on each other and see how everyone's doing. Are they still sort of having the time to invest into different work streams? Do they have any new ideas? And that's how we organize ourselves.
Yeah. So the slide that we showed you was kind of how we made the manifesto, and this is the manifesto itself, much more concise, as we're going to try and keep our presentation as well, to leave oxygen for the debate later. In terms of the work that we do, one of the more successful work streams that we've taken part in and created is called Civic Rituals. We put on, this is actually before both of our times, so we say we in the kind of collective, like historical we, but we put on a series of walking tours in Brixton and in Woolworth to try and kind of platform the local community and community leaders and the kind of histories and experiences that people have, especially along the high streets. And they were documented through a series of images and kind of audio content. We also commissioned an illustrator called Olivia Twist to respond to that event, which was really interesting. And that also led to a series of screen prints and more visual pieces as well. One of our more recent work streams is called Thesaurus for Change, which aims to challenge architecture language in the industry, to try and communicate and translate some of those jargony bits to people outside the industry, but then also try and celebrate words that people use that aren't like conventional, traditional. So the image here is from a workshop we did as part of Open House, where we were really we were lucky enough to be able to hold space at Host of Leighton, And so we got so many people streaming in, responding to words such as architect, gentrification, regeneration, affordable housing. And the conversations we had were so interesting. I think we want to have more workshops like that and then put together a kind of response to that at some point in the near future. But that was really interesting. And these are some of the collateral from that workshop. People just kind of writing down what they think and responding to images too, not just words. And one of our other work streams is inclusive play spaces, of which you were a part.
Yeah. I was a bit more involved in this one than Mich, but the clue is in the name. This is about inclusive play spaces, and our goal here is to try and make a design guide about making playgrounds and play spaces more inclusive. We've been running some workshops with Beadlesford School in Kingston, who they were so nice to sort of partner with us to run some workshops, and it was amazing because and this is kind of ends up happening with our work. We collaborate with each other to make collaborative workshops, so it's kind of like an inception of collaboration. But these were really interesting because they challenge not just ideas about play space, but also ideas about communication. Some of these kids were non-verbal, so you have to think about different ways to communicate, as well as the actual workshop itself. We're still ongoing with this. We had a workshop last week and one was meant to be tomorrow, but we're hoping to continue, and I think this is going to be a really great one.
And we've also got a workshop with Open City Accelerate that we're doing really soon, maybe multiple. So yeah, that's kind of a good segue into us concluding our presentation, in that we work in different work streams based on like interest and capacity. We're quite flexible. Something I also completely forgot to mention is that Poppy is a young trustee, and Poppy's like right there. I literally forgot. Hi, Poppy. So yeah, we work in different work streams based on capacity and interest. We're really flexible. So if life is really hard in London. So like if something happens, we're really open and communicative, and if we can't do stuff, we can't do stuff. We're not getting paid for this, and we have day jobs. So yeah, we're really open with each other about what we can and can't do, and we should kind of like fluctuate. And I think themes we wanted to touch on tonight, and can't wait to hear everyone else's presentations in the debate, is how sometimes collaboration isn't appropriate, and how sometimes you need hierarchy, and sometimes there are moments for non-hierarchy. I think we're mainly the latter, but sometimes there are moments where, like, for admin and communication purposes, it's really good to have a clear voice. And we'd love to also talk about the day-to-day, like the boring stuff, like using Miro and like emails and like file management. But yeah, lots to talk about, and also love to talk about architecture education, because that has got to change. Anything else from you?
I think let's just conclude it here, but I think it'd be really interesting to just get the presentations through so we can start discussing, because I think that will be the most interesting part of tonight. I'll pass it on to you.
Okay, yes. Thank you for the lovely introduction, and it's so nice to be here talking about this topic in particular. When I was invited, I think it was sort of like a vague hint that it was about kind of collectives and things like that. But then when I saw what specifically kind of the theme around that was, I was like very excited, because I feel like most of the time that I talk about HI-VIS, I have to put a spin on it. Mm-hmm. And it's really nice to be able to have the opportunity to talk about how collective work is not always as utopian as we wish it to be. So yeah, I'm mostly going to talk today about the main project that we did as HI-VIS, which is up in that top corner. It's the Feminist Library in Peckham in London. But I'm also going to touch on a few of my other projects that I've gone on to do since then, which is the LGBTQ+ Community Centre in London on the South Bank, Out and About, which was an exhibition I designed at the Barbican in 2022. And in that bottom corner is a picture of an exhibition I designed for Camp Trans at Ugly Duck last year. I decided to form HI-VIS in 2016, which I was horrified to realize when I was putting this together. It was 8 years ago. And yeah, I was very much a baby feminist and a baby dyke. And I was full of ideas and aspirations and enthusiasm. I just finished my diploma, and I was dissatisfied and furious about so many things. And yeah, I very much went into it uninformed and unprepared. And let's talk about that. So we had kind of like an open meeting. I sort of put out an open call. And I guess I feel like sometimes it's useful to situate this in like the context of feminism in 2016, which I feel like it was like it was like at the beginning of a sort of like pop cultural like resurgence. And I felt like I was very much someone who kind of like wasn't particularly well informed about feminism prior to around that time. So I think it was like an interesting time where I think a lot of like women that I knew or like had studied with, we were all kind of like starting to ask questions about things because they were like in the media in a way they weren't previously. But no one really knew, well, we certainly didn't really know what we were talking about. But yeah, there was definitely like an appetite. But yeah, so we kind of had an initial meeting, we put together a manifesto, and what I would say is kind of like a lot of the initial aspirations kind of like petered out a little bit because, you know, we were all like part twos mostly and like had day jobs, and it's hard to kind of like get people to commit to things. And like I had no organizing experience, no one else really had any organizing experience. It was difficult to kind of get a lot of different things off the ground. And like also when I talk about this project, and also to be honest, the other projects that I do, which have all been outside of like having a day job, I try and be kind of like upfront and honest about like the realities of that and not sugarcoat it. And to be honest, a big part of like what affected the early like days of HI-VIS is like I came out around that time and I became preoccupied more with kind of like myself and like finding myself and all of this type of stuff. So I think it's important to acknowledge that like your priorities can shift, and you know there has to be room in these endeavors for like personal growth, etc. So yeah, it kind of evolved into something else, basically, is what I'm saying. But I think a lot of the early conversations were useful. So I was quite keen that we found a way to like do actual like built projects. So the Feminist Library at the time were based in Southwark in a building they'd been in for 30 years, and the council was kicking them out. And they did kick them out. They still have not developed this building. It's just sitting there empty. But they needed a new home. I approached them to see if they wanted any help. And what ended up happening, which I think is the thing that has prompted most of my reflections around collective work, is we ended up in a sort of like coalition of groups. So HI-VIS kind of ended up being like me and one other person that I studied with, and someone else who was also a designer but didn't really want to work collectively, and then two other people who had their own collective called Power Project, which was, they were more like, one of them was an engineer and the other one was like an industrial designer, and they like were more about like, they kind of were bringing like a different discipline, basically. They're more about fabrication, and they were both women, and they kind of like ran these really cool workshops out of the Livesey Exchange in Southwark. Anyway, so these are some pictures of what the Feminist Library looked like before it left. So like years of like kind of gorgeous like community layering and richness and kind of, yeah, just a lot of kind of character that accumulated over time. And a big concern in that project was like, how can we create a new community space that doesn't feel like this kind of like tabula rasa on sort of, yeah, this incredible richness that like community spaces tend to kind of like generate over time. Another challenge was that they like had this like incredibly chaotic collection that was sort of impossible to visualize because new boxes would like turn up out of nowhere, and I've found this working with like many different kind of like community groups and stuff, like the briefing process, the thinking about budgets, like none of it is done in like the ways that you do it in traditional practice. And there's things about that are really great. And like it opens doors for thinking about projects in completely different ways. But it's obviously, you are often more designing like a toolbox or like a kit of parts or like an approach that can be applied to the project as you go rather than like a fixed design. So the Feminist Library was originally going to move into the Livesey Exchange on the Old Kent Road, but that fell through after Grenfell because the government kind of made up some rubbish about that building. So this was like founded in 2016. We worked on this project for 4 years. Took a very long time for them to actually get somewhere to move to. And eventually there was this old school hall offered by the council in Peckham. What we ended up doing was taking all the old shelving from the old feminist library. There was some shelving that was donated. We took all of that shelving and like over one weekend, we basically sorted physically all of the shelving. We taped out the shape of the new feminist library in this barn. And we basically kind of like mocked it up in real sort of like one-to-one scale, which I think felt like the kind of like the bit of this project where like HI-VIS was what I had dreamed it to be, where we were just kind of like women or people who identified as women at the time in this space, building stuff, basically. And the guy who came to collect it, to take it off to be powder coated at the end of the weekend, said that he estimated like we had all lifted 1 ton each that weekend, which maybe is an exaggeration, but I don't know. But yeah, we had this lovely process of like kind of like mapping that like as we went in like sort of like an analog way, which then translates into this plan with these like exploded elevations. Like basically the idea with this space, it was a lot smaller than the space they already had, wrapping the space in the collection so that, it's a flexible space. The main area of the hall is free for like events, various different things to take place. But also like what was different from the old space is that like events were taking place within the collection itself. So, film screenings, talks, panels, whatever it is. I've recently gave a talk at the Feminist Library myself about the project, and like I was really pleased to see that like that actually happens, that people are in that space in breaks, they start picking things off the shelves, conversations spark, it works. And this is just a cute little model I made of the library with every single book modeled, which was just nice to include because it's nice. And these were some kind of visuals that were mocked up to fundraise for the project. And then here's all the shelving that had been powder coated. So because it was this like mishmash of shelving, we did decide to kind of like get it unified with like a color to kind of bring a certain amount of like order to the space, but like not too much. And then the project, the new space opened, and it opened honestly about a week before the pandemic started. So after 4 years of work, I didn't go back there for like 3 years. So these pictures are from last year, like so very much like bedded in. It wasn't open during the pandemic, so it was kind of like a damp ending to an extremely like long and arduous project. But it's very much like a thriving space now, and I think that like something that felt really important to me working on this project was that the old feminist library had been in its space for 30 years. And let's just say like politically, it felt a little bit like it had been stuck in a certain position for 30 years. And I was really keen, like, how could we, like, for want of a, this is being recorded, isn't it? Oh yeah. Basically like, how can you like, to what extent as an architect can you start to like shape a space that feels like it's like hostile to like TERFs, basically? Like how do you give like a new lease of life, but like this incredible collection that like so many people weren't accessing and making use of because the space itself felt like hostile. And I do feel like it's been so beautiful to like watch what has happened to the Feminist Library, which I feel like our work was like 1% of that. Like it's so much down to like a change in like who organizes like the volunteers and like everything else. Like when you go there, it's like really youthful, like really diverse. I feel like it's like completely been revolutionized, which is fantastic. And like I always feel like with the community projects I work on, like it's about providing an apparatus and like the community like does the rest. And I feel like we did successfully like provide the best apparatus we could within the means we were working with. So I just wanted to like quickly touch on a few other like examples of collective working I've experienced since then, and then I've got like a few like reflections. How am I doing for time? Like, is it okay? I really like got into that. I'll rush. It's fine. So yeah, that I've got some reflections at the end, but I guess it was a struggle working collectively on that project. And like the headline, I would say, reason why that is that like partly like we weren't working under one kind of collective name. Like it was like a coalition of people with like different concerns. And yeah, that essentially like I don't think people had shared goals with that project, which means that like I kind of fundamentally feel that like no collective work is ever going to be successful and is only ever going to lead to conflict if you fundamentally don't have shared goals that are established from the beginning. So since then, I think like something that really rehabilitated my experience with collective working is like work that I've done within the Architects Union in 2021. Myself and some others formed a working group to kind of respond to some stuff around gender desegregation that the government was proposing. We like wrote these pieces in the space of like 2 weeks collectively, like researched them, wrote them, edited them. And that was like an incredible experience of collective working. And it was because there was no egos involved. We all had exactly the same concerns. We were all angry about the same things. People were coming at it from a completely different angles. Like there were some people in that group who were deeply affected by this stuff, and there were some people who weren't. But we all wanted the same thing, and it was such a smoothly oiled machine for that reason. The LGBTQ plus community center, I just wanted to include this project. You know, this is a project I did myself. It wasn't like I wasn't designing in collective. But something that was really nice about that project is I was really determined that it would be built entirely by LGBTQ plus people. So right from the plumber, the electrician, everyone who works on it. And I guess I wanted to include that because it was a nice example of like a collective construction site and trying to kind of create a different sort of construction site culture. And, you know, again, it was very much an experiment, but I wanted to pop it in there, I guess, for the discussion later. It might be interesting. And a similar thing on Out and About exhibition that was entirely fabricated by LGBTQ plus people. So I guess it's the kind of like, you know, nothing about us without us type of thing. Like, and then Camp Trans, similarly entirely fabricated by trans people. And this was really a project that like had some interesting collective aspects. It was so like pushed for like time and budget and this project was basically all about like making camp in a gallery and how like exhibitions are kind of like a form of going camping. And what I ended up doing with some of the elements that there just really wasn't time to design was kind of saying, we'll have leftover materials, we'll have lots of branches, we'll have lots of tarp, we'll have rope, and we will make camp on the day. Like we will just fashion stuff. And it was really beautiful to see like all the volunteers who like came for us to install. It was basically a fundraiser exhibition for low-income tickets to the camp. So lots of people like volunteered to help out, and they just picked stuff up from that pile of materials and like, you know, created things. So it was a really nice way of like sort of designing and making like collectively. Yeah, and I mean, it was really nice as well. Like when we then later installed some of those things at the camp, like there was a real nice kind of collectivity to the way that these like big structures like had to be installed collectively. And then, yeah, I guess more recently this is not a picture of something I've done. I've just like got this from Google because I was aware that this was being recorded. But like, I think more recently I've been thinking about ways that as a designer and an architect, you can be involved in other types of collective work, like political organizing, direct action. Like, for example, you might do an ad hack and design the ads for that. And I think there's a lot of kind of untapped potential there for like the skills that designers have and how they can be put to good use. Okay, so some reflections. Maybe I don't have time for these, or we could come back to them. It's okay. So I guess collectivity in general, I think people are increasingly talking about this, and there's many reasons for that, and it's kind of our current like political climate that I think people are increasingly realizing that things are getting worse and worse, and that ultimately we won't survive without each other. Like, we need to work collectively. I think that most people in this room will have experienced the way that architecture schools and offices kind of teach us a cult of individualism and competition. And you can't bring that into the room with collective work. You're all bringing different skills, you're all bringing different experiences. And the point of collective work is that like, you bring that stuff together as a collective, you are stronger for it. And this thing I mentioned earlier, it removes the ego from the situation. I think it's crucial that you are like working under like a collective group name, that no one is kind of like claiming to be authoring this work or co-authoring it. And yeah, I mentioned about shared goals, and yeah, that I think also it's important that like that shared goal is something that is like greater than, I don't know, we want to be a really successful architecture practice that's in lots of magazines. I think like that kind of ends up being like individualistic again. So yeah, it kind of wants to be something like a shared kind of political goal at least. So I think there were some questions that you kind of put out in the email that I had some reflections on, and maybe we'll come back to them. But yeah, I guess I could almost summarize this entire slide by saying like, you need to have like a strategy day. If you're thinking about doing something like this, you need to have like a day where you like all sit down together, you strategize, you talk about like everything, like what are we doing? What is our overall aim? How are we going to make decisions? Like, who is doing what? What if someone wants to leave? Who can join? Is this open to everyone? If it isn't, why not? Who is it open to? Like, and also thinking about the like ways that you don't want to work. Like certainly the type of collective work I've done, like it's not an office. You don't want to recreate the office. You're in the office every day. Like, this is your chance to like imagine a different way of working and like do some world building. And then this thing I like majorly wanted to flag, because like I feel like it does one thing like architects are terrible at. It is like having proper meetings. And basically, yeah, do take a picture of that. Seriously. Because I mean, I've learned how to have like proper collective organizing meetings from like doing like organizing, like political organizing. And that's where like you can learn the most. And like, I guess, yeah, I mean, it's written there, we can like share the slides or whatever, but like it is so important to like actually have like proper structures in place. I think that like people have this feeling that like, we're designers, we're like artists, like let's just sort of like be like free and like let ideas just like percolate around the room and like just go round and round in circles. But like you need like a proper structure, because people are often like giving their time for free. Like you need to have like action points. You need an agenda. You need to think about access. Like you can't just kind of do this stuff in an airy-fairy way. And I say that as someone who like absolutely did do it in an airy-fairy way when I started trying to do this type of work. And then, yeah, this is the last slide. Just thinking about navigating collective design. I think that design is something in particular that is actually very difficult to do collectively. And that's because I like quite strongly believe that like architecture is self-expression. Like creative work cannot escape the conditions from which it emerges. Like we all have our own lenses, our own kind of like social and political biases. Like that's a lot of the time where our work comes from. Some of those like lenses are like invisibilized, but they're still very much there. And like, you know, you can have a group of people who have shared identities. There's still like going to be intersections, like you're all different people and you're going to be coming at design from different places. And like, it does make it difficult to like kind of create collectively. Thank you.
So hi, so we're part of Patch Collective, and my name is Aude Tollo, and this is...
I'm Ella.
Yes. And so we are a multidisciplinary collective that's composed of 7 London-based spatial practitioners. And I mean, as you said, we were part of the New Architecture, right, the third cohort in 2021, composed of like young, aspiring POC writers. And actually what we do now is that we create spatial intervention, design ephemeral event, and create intimate discussion through the lens of the diaspora. And in all of our events, we make an effort to critique the culture that we are in at the moment with our primary culture. And we celebrate the shared space created by migrant communities. And but the most recent event was with Open House, and it was called Holding Space, a collection, and it was directed by Nema and Betty, who are 2 members of Patch Collective. And so they were trying to shift the focus from London Cultural Centre to this idea of London being a polycentric, London being of a polycentric nature. So, and the way they did it is by creating a series of talks through different buildings that are not situated in the center of London, as a way to celebrate the diverse network of community that give the cities its quality. So looking at different communities, and I think one of the most like an interesting one was in Oost-Leighton. I mean, all of them were interesting, but it's the one I know the most. And I think talking about Patch Collective, what's interesting is to see how we managed to kind of create a collective identity. And the way we did it is, first of all, through the different events that we were able to do with New Architecture Writer. And the first one was at Waterloo City Farm, which is, I think, where you created the, yeah. And so what we did is, the event was called A Seat at the Table, and and so we were interested, we tried to explore how food mark cultural identity in the city, and we tried to highlight food as a key cultural amenity. And so we had 3 different courses, and each of the courses were accompanied with speakers that talked about food and the city, in which we had Melissa Anif, which was part of Resolve Collective, and Jonathan Nunn, which is a food and city writer in London, as well as Rachel Dring, which is the founding director of Crop Drop, hiring a local veggie box scheme. And then we had an other event called When I Get Home. And if you're a fan of Solange, you can realize that both of the events are named after Solange albums. So yeah, we like her as well as a collective. So that's what unites us as well. So When I Get Home was an event celebrating the act of hosting, and we're more focused on how like we could create a shared space. Through immigration, like each of the different migrant community were able to create those space for hosting, and it's something that was important in all of our cultures. And so the event focused on we produced a zine called When I Get Home as well, and each of us wrote a text about what home means to us in a multi-layered way. And then we also had like a video in the background, and we had food as well as a DJ, because we all like to have food at our events. I think, again, it's something that unites us as a collective. And then after those two events, we realized that there were certain themes that we're really interested in and we wanted to explore more. And I mean, the first one that's quite obvious is diaspora experiences, as well as access to the city. The idea of inequality in the city, eating together, and as well as, care and hosting. And so the one that we decided to explore more, obviously, was care and hosting. And our next event, which was a collaboration with Coffee Architects, was focused on care and hosting and was called Holding Space. So the first event we had was a conversation with Shumi Bose, and we were all talking about what it means to hold space in the city and trying to bring personal experience into that. And we also had like little postcard where you could write what it means to hold space in the city for you. And again, there was food and music, because we like to have a party at the end. Then we had another event, which was more about the power of imagining and creating spaces where you feel at home. So it was collage making workshop, where everyone had to make a collage talking about what it means to hold space in the city and what they would like to see more in the city. Because we really believe that it's like first by imagining something that then you have like groundbreaking ideas. And I think what was one of the most interesting part of that workshop was talking about it after, and how people will create a different narrative about it's like new stories will emerge out of those collages after, like just talking to each other or like listening to someone else. And what's interesting about that is like, I think taking the pressure of the fact that ideas are never always coming from you, but it's always like a collective effort. And I think this kind of demonstrated that after when we were each talking about our collages. And in those two events, like those two holding space events, we're working with Coffee Architecture. And I mean, it was an interesting experience, which I think Leela will talk about it more.
Yeah. So I think that oh yeah, I mean, so us being a collective, collaborating with an institution, in this case an architecture practice, kind of brought its own complexities, which were really useful in terms of us having access to funds. And I think that it really sharpened our own collective output in understanding how to communicate to a bigger audience and actually advocate for our own financial needs. But then I also think that there are other kind of complexities in how do you align your collective vision with another collective vision, and do those things align? What is the best way to kind of coordinate and mediate between the frictions that are there? I think that working as a collective, again, we have our own personal friction and tension between us, which I think is generative. But then I think there's other times when friction is degenerative. So I think that was a really interesting learning curve for us.
And I mean, this one, the benefit of working as a collective is more about how do we work as a collective. We mostly have a non-hierarchical approach, but there's a rotation of leadership according to which project we tackling at the time, where leadership, meaning it's not those people that necessarily make all of the decision, but they're the one that take care of admin mostly, answering to email and ensuring that we have a collective identity. So this tend to rotate. But then also something important is when there's no micromanagement. When we divide tasks, we trust in each other capabilities, if that's a word. yeah, we trust in each other and the skills. So I think this avoid a lot of issues. And also we're a fairly new collective, and we have, I think you talked about it a bit, we have very similar goals and aim and idea of what we don't want to do as well as what we want to do. So this is quite helpful. And I think that for now we don't have so many conflict, but maybe if we had more money, we will have more conflict. But so far, it's going well. But yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about accountability and responsibility. So within our collective management and self-management, again, we try to keep on top of just like basic organizational health. So like keeping meeting minutes, doing agendas, admin, and all of those like really key things that you were talking about earlier. And I definitely agree with what you were saying about architects being a little bit soft around the edges when it comes to those things. And I think that personally, in the practice that I work, I learned a huge amount from working with the local authority and just seeing how pedantic you have to be in keeping meeting minutes and getting consent and acknowledgements and all of those things. And I think that they are really excellent skills for us to use as designers in like keeping a collective accountability and helping us to actually progress our needs and agendas. Also, I think that for us, we are really interested in creating events, and our events are open to public network. So it's like our immediate network, obviously strangers, and also it can be working with young people as well, which helps us to be really astute, think really carefully about access, how we're communicating our ideas, our desires, and all of those kinds of things. And I think that having a live event which can take on a life of its own at any time is a really good way to actually test the kind of integrity of your vision and see if what you are proposing can actually be taken up by others in a way which is joyful, which is what we try to aim for. Also, again, we like to do vision days, which is like a really key way that we keep our vision together. And I would say also in terms of like interpersonal accountability, we are friends first. So we check in with each other. And I think that because we had the privilege of meeting as a cohort in New Architecture Writers, it meant that we could get to know each other as friends rather than kind of being put together like the X Factor or something like that. So I think it's easier for us to stay cohesive because we actually respect each other outside of any kind of, career-based platform. So on reflection, I would very briefly say that we really like to use our collective as a way to imagine different kinds of workspaces. I don't necessarily want to say a workplace because we don't want to replicate that, but I think it's nice to respect and come to a mutual understanding of everyone's different capacities, skill sets, and kind of redefine what productivity actually means. Maybe it can just be productive to be friends and have like a mutual solidarity group in being architects of colour in London. And I would also say that to any students who are interested in working collectively, I would say like it can literally start tomorrow, today in university. So I did a group project kind of very spur of the moment for my final year here at the AA. And I actually think that doing group work spontaneously can be a really radical thing to do in and of itself, especially in the current like state of higher education, which is extremely atomized and individualized. And it can actually be very radical for students to take their own kind of, self-organization, self-discipline, and just be propositional in how they think about their work as a collective platform. I would also say that working collectively, whether you're getting paid or not, it's really important to account for your time in a like granular way. So even if you don't have any access to money, obviously ask for money always. But even if you have no payment, like account for your time as if you were being paid, so that you actually know the cost of your labor, the cost of your skills, and the cost of your expertise.
Yeah. is very important, actually. Like that one, that's like one of the most important things to do. But thank you.
Thank you so much. So nice to be here. And so nice to be invited by students. Really appreciate it. And nice to be back. I studied here many moons ago and I taught here and been away for a while, but now it's really nice to be here and think about this because when I finished studying, I went like, my parents were really happy that I now get a proper job. And I went into an office and after 5 months, I walked out abruptly. And there's a moment in Italo Calvino's The Baron in the Trees where he doesn't like his food and goes and climbs a tree and never comes back. And it felt like one of those moments of rejection of something I should be doing. And out of that moment, Public Works was formed, which is a group of, at the moment, 9 people. That was my moment into Public Works. But of 9 people, artists, architects, performers, who've been going for 20 years, since 1999, and formally since 2004, formally. And I also teach at Central St. Martin's, and I feel Central St. Martin's is in a way a platform for a lot of the learning to turn into teaching, which has been really fulfilling for the last 2 years. So I've structured the talk into 3 sections: becoming collective, relational architectures, and becoming relational. The first one is about Public Works, how we became a collective, and maybe the mechanics of it. Relational architecture, how it relates to architecture, and how the production of relation can be understood as a form of architecture. And becoming relational is about teaching, becoming an architect, becoming relational. So maybe I should turn the slide. And I might have too many slides, I might just stop, yeah? So you will never know. So it's really boring. Leaving school, I started to sit at home on my sofa and I started working with friends and we did projects and we just named ourselves Böhm, Zafar Lang, whoever was on the project. And Torange, who you might know, works here as well, Diploma 2, I believe, won a Europe competition, European, and started a studio. And for a long time, we worked informally in this constellation. And in a way, it was a kind of way of building trust, getting to know each other, understanding where you want to be, what you want to do. And out of this continuous finding each other in collaboration, it felt it would be nice to have a space together. And that space triggered the idea we need a name. How do we sign our lease? Who's the lease? So we formed a partnership, PPL, I think it is. And a few years later turned that into a limited company. And the limited company was interesting because it's limited by guarantee, so it's a non-for-profit, which allowed us to generate different kind of fundings. We had like charities, we could access different funds, but also it meant we had to have a mission, we had to kind of answer and fulfill all these other things. So it really helped us focus on what we should be as an organizational form. The number 529 is we started as 5, and then it at one point became a family business, down to 2 because people left. And there's always this moment of coming together, which is the founding moment, the origin, which seems very precious and important. And I see that echoed in what you were talking about, this kind of bond that comes with starting out together. And it's often quite hard for collectives, I would think, to reproduce. So how do you open up and allow others to feel the same sense of ownership in the endeavor? And for us, that kind of reproduction came through teaching and through somehow being and getting to know younger practitioners and nurturing them, mentoring them, and trusting them to kind of join the group. And that's been amazingly successful. At the moment, we are 9 and 9+, because there's a growing network of members around Public Works, which are collaborators. And the 9+ is really, I guess, if you work collectively, you rely more on networks, I would think, on rhizomatic networks, of somehow networks you share similar kind of intent with, but it might manifest itself differently in different places and different times and contexts. So this kind of network-based practice for us has been really crucial. in how we operate, but also the support structure that underlies our work and how we work. So at the moment we are 9 people. You see them on the left, and former members. And we don't have a house style. We never had. It's impossible because everyone wants to do what they want to do and in the way they like doing it. So we gave up on this idea of control quite soon. The drawing on the right is Carlotta drawing that we have many hands and lots of pies. She's really into a lot of food. But also it looks a bit like compost. And sometimes one art curator described our practice as a form of compost, of not trying to distill, but trying to layer continuously and allow things to cross-fertilize and ferment. And it's a bit what it feels like, that you're constantly in dialogue, you're constantly kind of stimulated, you contribute, and the thing shapes itself through all the stuff that's going on. So this idea that it's so controlled, kind of letting go of control, it was quite important and quite a reassuring experience as well. In terms of our day-to-day, everyone has become a director, so everyone has equal ownership in the country. It's a non-for-profit, so it means every profit is invested back into the company. There are no shareholders that extract. It also means we have hardly any employees, and it also means that everyone is driving to get their own work. And that's really important. I never liked that moment of having to motivate staff to kind of be excited about my project, which I think is the most awful thing you have to do. So there's a kind of sense of looking after yourself and looking after the collective, but also kind of a sense of enabling what you can use public works to do what you want to do. There's a track record, there's an archive, there's other people that can help you, there's a name, etc. So we all pay 20% of anything that we earn into the platform that kind of sustains it. We have seasonal meetings every 3 months. We share our resources. This is our office at the moment. We often move into the projects that we run. Often our projects are quite long-term. They're self-initiated or co-initiated. We help raise funds, and the economy around them is quite diverse. This at the moment is in Poplar and a space called Roban. I guess we have there's a kind of term called moving with the speed of trust, which I feel these projects are quite important in that sense, but also the trust you build amongst the members. And that trust forms, I would say, the shared mission, which is also, I guess, stated in the company mission. And Torange could give you a wonderful lecture now why this can be understood as a commons, but we feel it's very much a commoning practice that looks after a shared resource. It has a clear boundary and a governance structure which looks after the common good of everyone involved, but also of everyone involved externally. So maybe for me to summarize what public works is for me and what it tries to present is a move away from the transactional to the relational, where the production of relation and the transformative power of relations is maybe the load-bearing structure. Of course, there are transactional moments. It supports cooperation and explores what cooperation could look like versus competition. And it moves way away from a project logic to a practice logic. And by that, I mean a lot of enthusiasm, excitement you get when you're given a project and you mobilize a lot. And it's a kind of extractive project, I feel. So the idea of actually building practices that are not relying on the extractive nature of a project for us is quite important. And I feel also in the educational remit, I feel the shift towards practice and what kind of practitioner you want to be, what enables a certain form of practice is quite important to be taught and considered. So one more thing, I tried to bring in some colleagues which inspired me, and therefore could mention there, of course, also really inspiring people here at the AA. Hugo Hinsley, for me, sprang to mind, who you might know, might not know, who worked, I think in the 70s. When did he do support? It was the first cooperative office, which wasn't allowed previously. So there's a kind of pioneering moment within the AA, which was quite nice. This is a really wonderful project in Hamburg called Park Fiction, which for me was always inspiring because it was a really participatory project with the whole neighborhood. And Christoph Schäfer, who's one of the artists involved, he talked about this idea of a parallel process, of not asking for permission, but starting and going into action. And as you create that momentum, you start to negotiate with the kind of people in power and around you. And it's not trying to create an us and them, but trying to kind of create a moment of we are here, we are doing this, join, but also let's think about that together. And I think this idea of a parallel process for me was always very liberating, also working in bigger institutions or in offices, that you take initiative and you initiate and do, and it will shape itself within that structure. And working now in a big corporate university, I think public works has become extra important to be able to think and go back to these moments of, I would say, liberation, of where you're not getting kind of overwhelmed by these structures you're in. So the collective, for me, even though I'm maybe not there daily, has a really important support function. How am I doing with time? Yeah, a few more minutes, so I won't get to CSM. That's okay. That's me as Colin Ward. Do you know Colin Ward? Another hero of mine. Colin Ward. He was an anarchist town planner. He commissioned Walter Siegel's Siegel Close in Lewisham, but also Nubia Way. And that project apparently started with 200 people in a pub thinking about how to collectively self-build housing. And I thought this is a great moment to start with. So he was very important. Oh, I don't know how does the video work. Oh, can you click on the image? Is there sound? There's Colin in action. I think it's just a flame. Yeah, that's me. You see the B magazine there, which is a magazine that he produced, and on the cover is Adventure Playground in Loughborough Junction that took a goat and marched onto Brixton Town Hall because the Adventure Playground was under threat. And it ended up on the cover. And this is the same Adventure Playground, again threatened with closure. And as part of a performance we did for the Venice Biennale, they were marching again. The project in which this took place is called Loughborough Junction, or the Public Land Grab. And the question behind this project was, can residents develop without developers? So it's how do you bring that collective idea into producing a piece of neighborhood in architecture and maybe enabling residents to become, or citizens to become, developers. It's about this plot of land and working with the garden over many years to safeguard the piece of land. Of course, it has a piece of architecture on there now, which is co-designed with 00, Architecture 00. But the important thing for me about the project is to retain public land and public ownership, create an economy that's local and endorses itself locally, and create new jobs. And to I'm not going to go too deep into the project. I wanted to, in a way, talk about the role of the architects in this process. Traditionally, a lot of architects, they get commissioned when the main decisions are being set, and you're in a way powerless to kind of rethink them or steer them. So if you want to stand up for different values through your architecture, it might be that you have to start very early before the project is maybe even articulated. And with a lot of this kind of long-term projects, we're trying to do this and trying to immerse ourselves in a community, in a situation, and help steer the brief, steer what the project can become. And in this project specifically, it started through a student project, Tom Dobson at the RCA. This was a 6-year process of mobilizing, of bringing people together and raising funds, and Love Projection just opened. But what's been amazing is that effect of LJ Works, which is the kind of weird-shaped triangle in the middle, has created a kind of mutual support network that started to take over other spaces. The cafe across the street, the adventure playground is open again, all places that were threatened to be sold off and developed. And together with residents, now other forms of occupation happen, but also other kind of models of development are starting to take shape. So this is important in the architecture world. But really what is also important is the kind of people that you bring together, that you mobilize and collectivize behind it. And this was, again, part of the Venice Biennale when Manije invited us, which was very nice, and Mehdi. We thought we'd take this in a way to render the relational space or the relational architecture of our practice. And it was a kind of day-long event of bringing everyone who's been working on it and is involved in it onto the site to kind of perform the kind of invisible layer of that project. And you see the steering group in the middle. It's a bit like the Last Supper. But we made these pillows with their mission on, and we encouraged them to have a pillow fight because they really didn't get on very well. And the pillow fight was really a catalyst to get rid of all this pent-up anger. But it was amazing. We had Merdat, who is a kind of performance artist, who really egged them on and really kind of created that dynamic that in that moment really changed the temperature also for them of what it meant to be in the steering group. It was also a moment where for the first time everyone could get back on the site and occupy the site. So this kind of sense of ownership was kind of reinstated in the work. There are many more details which I won't go into. And there it is in Venice. And I think as a kind of render of a relational space, I think the narrative is quite important of describing the interconnectedness between all these different elements that are in the work. Maybe very quickly, CSM, I'm going to do it. There's a motto by the Artist Placement Group, context is half the work. And I think a lot what also Martha and you said is providing the context in which work can take place. I'm going to stop. I see your face. Yeah. And basically, I'm not going to talk about it, but maybe I'll let you hang in. Come visit us. Maybe I go to the last picture because there is Martha. She was with us yesterday. So that was really great. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great to hear a lot of, I guess, similar themes that you're bringing up, as well as very different perspectives coming from these quite different collectives and different ways of working. But first of all, I know we have quite a few questions, and I'm sure the audience does as well. So if anyone who wants to stick around and ask questions, it would be great. But we're also wondering if any of you have questions for each other that you initially wanted to ask, because I know you had some thoughts. So we thought we might just ask you first. Is anyone? Yeah?
It's not really a question, but I thought our reflections were kind of going to happen in the discussion. But something that I think all of you touched on was that working as a collective and working collaboratively are actually two very different things. This is my first time working in a collective, and I've worked collaboratively before, but I think everyone said this, it's so important to have an established goal or some sort of like common ambition, because without that it's so hard when you just go into collaboration. Without that, there's no established language, there's no sense of friendship, or it just makes it very hard to get anything done. I think, Martha, you mentioned that struggle that you had. One thing that, to me, when I worked collaboratively, and it was frankly a lot more difficult than working in a collective where everyone, even though they challenge each other, they still kind of agree, was if you go into a collaborative situation and you already have an outcome in mind, that's really hard, because if you already have an outcome in mind and you go to collaborate with people about it, then that's not collaborative. You need to go with a question or like something to discuss. You can't already have the outcome in mind because you don't know what's in the rest of the group's mind, so you can't possibly know what a collaborative outcome is. And the other thing as well is that I found helpful when I was collaborating in places where there was a bit more friction or people didn't know each other really well, was using artifacts. And I think that maybe, I don't know if everyone mentioned this, but definitely Patch had like the food, and I think it was the postcards, like I guess the pillow fights is something like objects have a lot of meaning, and people might not know each other, but it can be used as like something to start a discussion, and that's what you need to start to work collaboratively. So to that I say, like, the struggles of working collaboratively is you can't start it with a final outcome in mind unless you already have an established language. And if you don't, then artifacts are, I find, a fun way as well as a useful way to get conversation started. I don't know if you want to add anything, Mich.
Yeah. Well, no, I think what you said was amazing, but also it links back to what you said about that collective goal. I think that when, Patch, you were talking about like the food and the music, like that's your glue that then brings you together. And I think... And Solange, which by the way is like an insane album. I wish I'd gone to that event. And then Martha, you talked about, that shared goal as well. So I think there's a theme that like people are really different. And I think if we were all to have different goals and try and collaborate, maybe it wouldn't work. So, but then it brings the question that, I mean, and events like this as well, and like at, events at, the Barbican, at the AF, do we sometimes feel as if we're in a slight echo chamber? Maybe that's something we have to challenge, actually. Maybe, I don't know, I think it's a glue, it's crucial, but maybe it should be challenged, I don't know.
Who wants to go next?
Well, no, that just, I guess I have something like in response to that, which has now gone out of my head. Please come back. About, what was the thing you just said, please?
Artifacts.
Yes. I think, so in terms of kind of like this thing that was maybe brought up earlier about like how do you open up groups and like that type of thing, I think it's like a good point that it's like it can be an echo chamber. And I do think there's like this tricky thing sometimes with like collective or collaborative work where it's like, are you guys just like not all just like pals? And like, but the thing is it's like, that's fine if that's what you're saying you're doing. But sometimes people will present what they're doing as like, we're this like super radical, like inclusive group, and we're like representative of like everyone within like X group. But it's like, you all went to the same university and like, But I think what's important is creating spaces which are open to anyone, but with an understanding that like some people are there to listen and to learn, and like it's like how you can kind of, that's why I think that like this idea about like meeting facilitation and like structures, which often like it feels like to me, like especially as like a queer person who like sort of like I don't want structures. Like it feels like antithetical to me to be like, but we need like loads of structures. But it's like you need the structures in place in order to be able to like bring people in and bring people in safely, bring people in a way where like the people who are already there, who are maybe like more politically educated, feel safe. And that you can bring people in who like understand that like at the start, like they're there to just kind of like listen and learn and like, put that time in, and then suddenly like, you pick stuff up. But yeah, like I think is a very good point, because like it can be an echo chamber, but like I think this actually came up yesterday in the reviews at CSM about like how do we like do you risk sort of like being really insular, and like how do you bring people in? But it's like it's about how you do it, I think.
can do that as like, what are other tactics you use? What are tactics you guys use to make people feel, to enable new people within your collective, or make people feel, take ownership?
I think something that's quite important in general is to be open to criticism and like not taking it as an attack on yourself, but like, because it can be quite hard, like, because often I feel like we can easily fall into those echo chamber where everyone thinks the same as us. And so it's being open to criticism from other people as well, and handle those space with a lot of compassion, and not judging someone that comes to you with less knowledge. I think it's quite important. Not less, but a different form of knowledge. Yeah.
I also think that working in a collective like encourages you to be more embodied, because I feel like a lot of the time there's this idea that you can have this collective online, which you can in lots of ways, but I also think that when you have a collective organization that you're with which that you're in with your friends, colleagues, whatever, it helps you to make more, I don't know, sensory demands, which you can like touch, taste, and experience in a more radical way, and I think leads to more radical outcomes. I feel like I've definitely noticed this with us, like making events, because I think an event is like a good platform for people to obviously be embodied. And also, personally, I also work collectively doing sound system work, and I think doing that as well as like architecture and spatial design, all collectives like are completely different and have completely different ways of working. So I feel like working in Patch, like I try to take one approach, but then with my sound system, like the total of our admin is like one WhatsApp group. But then it's mostly about like having the shared outcomes, the shared knowledge. And I also think it's just about letting people, like appreciating that not everyone has the same access to embodied spaces. So I think that when you are in a collective, you can actually give people that access and bring them in rather than feeling as though you have to cultivate other kinds of like virtual personalities or virtual experiences.
I think the question of the event is really interesting. It's something that seems to bridge a lot of collectives. It's the idea of kind of engaging communities or people outside of your collective through workshops and events, this kind of thing. It seems something that the collective form is quite conducive to. And yeah, I guess I'm just wondering more about this form of the event and working with communities. And you talked about collaborating with other collaborators and these kind of coalitions. And yeah, have you ever kind of had, I don't know, what have your experiences been in kind of working with a community that's, engaging with communities through your collective, and how do you actually get people involved and interested and aware of what you're trying to do? Does anyone want to answer to that? Yeah.
Yes, a recent example where we worked, I don't know if it's necessarily working with a community, but being open to community and kind of holding space for that community, is that you notice that maybe collaborative work is different when you're doing it internally compared with if you're doing it like externally. So there's like different facets to working collaboratively or as a collective. It'd be interesting to see what would happen if you were really strict and making it, the same across the board. I don't know, but I certainly feel that, with our Disorders for Change workshop at Open House, it was more about listening, maybe like, at 200%, and then letting, obviously, whoever comes in kind of lead and, kind of holds the direction. It's almost like, I don't know if it's necessarily reversed, but you're there to enable and to support rather than to kind of like find a direction together. So it's more kind of, I don't know, it's kind of more exploded. But it can mean that it's not as kind of, I don't really know what I'm trying to say. It's kind of less focused by nature. And I think that has a big impact on how you work with people. So, but I'd love to know how you guys have all worked with communities and how that differs from how you work internally, because I can imagine it'd be very different. Any thoughts from you?
I think, I mean, what you said, I resonate and I relate, but I think another chapter of the events is actually a lot of the boring side of working in a collective is involved in that part of our work, because it involves reaching out to people, staying on top of emails, replying to people, organising the events, writing agendas, and I think that's the less glamorous side of I'm not sure if you guys agree, but I think it's the less glamorous side of things, but it is just as important, because if you're actually going to create the outcomes and the things that you want, just instead of just discussing your ideas, you need to do that work. So I think talking about, how do you organize the events is actually a really good opportunity to talk about the practical sides of running a collective, and where the line blurs between, you do need some sort of hierarchy there, you do need someone to lead. It's maybe at those points where, for us at least, I don't know with your collective, which they're quite large, but we fragment as well. So we don't have everyone working on every work stream. We sort of split up and separate, because otherwise actually sometimes it's too many people working on organising one event. So we have lead roles and support roles. So that's how we organise ourselves in terms of getting the events together.
Maybe going into communities is quite maybe good to distinguish whether it's your community, you're part of it, or whether it's kind of you're entering into. When we first started, we did a lot of kind of small art projects and felt really empowered and wanted to apply them more to architectural projects, and they always failed. So I felt it's nice to maybe act as a resident or citizen first. So we started this community garden across the street, and it was so liberating to call the council and be really the guy like complaining. But it sensitized me also to a lot of how maybe how privileged I am in certain situation, or if I walk into a neighborhood, I bring my certain taste, I bring my education, everything with me, and somehow letting go of that, or kind of seeing that in yourself, is quite important going into the situation. Like we would make these wonderful flyers, we thought amazing. No one comes because they speak of a certain whatever, education, etc. So it's understanding how you get to know and listen to a community in order to gain the trust to act within the community. I think it's easier if you're already part of that community.
We would also love to open up the questions and answers to the audience. If you guys want to contribute, I see some amazing people that have worked in collectives and worked collaboratively. So if you guys have any questions.
Thank you for the talk. That was really refreshing and inspiring. I had a question in terms of the frictions that you spoke about. What did they sort of entail? Was it more regarding to was it the amount of people on a particular project, or is it more financial? What sort of frictions? What are they? Because and why do you need the mechanisms for you to have, for example, the organizations and the meetings and stuff? What are the frictions the reason behind that, or is it something else?
So with HI-VIS, I think ultimately the frictions, I would say, were generated by a combination of inexperience in working collectively. And then also I think that ultimately we weren't completely choosing who we were working with. And I think that people just had different priorities and different reasons they wanted to be involved in that project, which is kind of fine if you're working on your own, but it's very difficult when you're working collectively. And then in terms of these structures, there's endless reasons. And now when I find myself in spaces where there aren't no structures, it's I can feel the reasons screaming at me from all around, because it's one thing is access. Not everyone can come to the meeting. You can't expect everyone to come to the meeting. You can't expect everyone to attend the meeting in person. So you need minutes so that people can catch up. You need an agenda so that you stay on time. The meeting doesn't go on for hours and hours and hours. People might have somewhere else they need to be. You need someone to volunteer to facilitate that's different each time. So not, you're sharing the burden of that, but like, someone's keeping things on track. But also, like, I think what's really key, this is such a key thing to like working collectively, is that what a facilitator does in a meeting is that they make sure that like that person in the room who always has loads to say isn't the only person that speaks, and that they can say, actually, you said enough today, and I'm going to go to like so-and-so in the corner here, like who hasn't contributed, but probably has something to say, but is like a bit shyer. So it's like the structures we can put in place to like, aid like the collaboration and the collectivity that like otherwise we sort of just like fall into like these default modes. And it's like massively about access as well. So yeah, like I think that's what I would say to that. I feel like you guys might have no.
So again, I think because we're very new and we kind of really like each other, we don't have that many conflicts. But often I think when there's a bit of tension in the areas when someone feels like they're taking on too much of the project and they're a bit tired, and I think it's important to know when to like reshift like the structure, or like also those people that feel like they're taking on a lot, they can be like, listen, like this is a bit much, so could you take care of that? And I think often that's when like tension happens, when it feels like the work is unequally distributed or it's too much for what they can give at the moment. No.
Just like off the back of that, actually, I recently listened to this podcast with this organizer called Dean Spade. He was talking about burnout. And something that they said was that like a classic symptom of burnout is that you are taking on like basically you can't relinquish control of anything, that you're like doing everything. And it's because like you feel like you're so highly strung that you feel like if you like let go of something for even what you feel like you can't rely on like anyone else. And I feel like so often with these types of collective working, it's stuff that you're doing in your spare time. It's so easy to burn out, but it's also so easy to feel like, I was talking about this with Poppy before we started, like if I don't do it, or like it needs to be perfect, or like, because it's like usually something you really care about. So I feel like, yeah, it's like something to watch out for.
I guess for us, it's often when either needs are not met or expectations are unclear. So economy is sometimes a friction of what you said, like how we value work and what work is valued how. And then often I think you carry expectations with you. You might not be aware yourself and how you navigate that. And I also feel as architects, we are somehow trained to lie, to raise expectations. Like in a competition, to win the job, you over-exaggerate how great it's going to be. And you're constantly in this sales pitch. And I think that's, in a collective work, is dangerous. I think you have to be quite honest what you can and can't do. Yeah.
I was just going to add, because the way that you ended that sentence was kind of a really nice segue to what I was going to say. You said you have to be realistic about what you can and can't do. And we have this like term that we use a lot for the young trustees. We say critical friend, and we do use it for people that are kind of like needing a break, and they're sort of away from the activity that's going on. But I think we're all critical friends of each other. And I think Katie says devil's advocate. And I think that's important to actually like be realistic. We're having a discussion, we're all being really passionate about, we could do this workshop and we can do this and we can get this person and we can bring all these materials, and why don't we all come in on a Wednesday? Oh wait, we all have jobs. It's good to have other people there that make sure they are being critical friends, and they're like, is that realistic? because if you don't have that, especially as you said, Martha, if it's something that is really close to you, you can end up setting yourself up for failure. You can overpromise, especially when you're working with other people, other workshops and other institutions, and you overpromise to them. If you underdeliver, I think I feel like that is kind of like it hurts the group as a whole. So having what we call critical friends is something that I really enjoy in our collective. Do you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered it, but I'd love to hear about other groups and how you guys work with like different capacities. So like, you know, if one of you is really just out of it for like 2 months, how does that work with you guys? And we do something at the start of every meeting. I'm sure you guys do this too. We just like check in with each other, like personal life, work life, capacity, and what, sorry? Oh yeah, and we even kind of log it in a Google Excel style spreadsheet, you know, people were away and stuff. So I think to build on Martha's point earlier as well about structure, I think we are quite happy as a group to sit kind of associated with an institution, which may be slightly different from how the rest of you work, in that we are kind of enabled and we're kind of given, I guess, legitimacy from an institution, but we don't necessarily have to, you know, abide by, you know, their program or their agenda and that kind of thing. And that we kind of find a balance between those things. So we have some structure that we bring in, but then we find moments where we're super flexible and like non-hierarchical and things. So we kind of try and do both. But that was kind of half of my point. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys what you guys have to do with that.
To do with when people need time off?
Yeah. Like capacity change, etc.
I don't know. I think a big thing for us that people want to have kids. And how do you support it? Who steps in? How do you step in? How do you build support? If people don't manage to generate jobs, how does the network support? And I guess the trust is that you can raise that in a meeting or bring it to the group and make it an issue for the group. And I think that happens quite frequently, I would say. Burnout, not so much. Maybe we're too, I don't know. Yeah.
Is that to do with how you work, or is that just...
I think you can regulate a bit more how you work. I mean, we work a lot, and we work also on weekends because a lot of community work happens on Saturday. But I think you do regulate. You have more control over your time, I would say, which can also be a negative thing. So there's no time where you have to be somewhere. You organize it. It's not like a start of the workday.
Hi everyone, my name is Bash. I'm actually an engineer. I work in crowd dynamics and people movement. So I'm not an architect, but I work with a lot of architects, and I'm here to try to spy on you and understand what goes in your minds. What I noticed is at certain point, it's almost less about the technical elements and more about the psychology. Who you're talking to, what are their motivations, what are their needs, and how you actually manage to capture that. And if you fail, you meet a lot of resistance, a lot of friction. And no matter how great your idea is and what you're trying to do, it's just you struggle to get it off the ground. And I was wondering if you've had a similar experience. How do you do working as a collective? You know, I work in a company, so it's a different environment. But I was wondering, in a collective, how do you manage to capture that, whether it's with your colleagues, people you're working with, or even communities, people, residences, etc. So yeah, we're interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
Do you mean how we capture everyone's different interests?
Yes, in a way, making them feel that they're part of it. You know, from me, I know it's in a company, it's more about agendas. Is what you're proposing, or a client, is it aligned with what they're trying to achieve? So that might be different in a collective, but I'm interested in understanding how do you manage to have these conversations, to capture these, to understand them, so that you can build on them?
I think that, well, I don't know if everyone else here will agree, but I don't know if it's that formal. I don't know if there's ever like a point where we're like, okay, let's just stop our activities and look around the table and come up with a new idea at this one meeting. I think for us at least, it's always open for anyone to just put in our chats. I'm thinking about doing this slightly different in this work stream, or it might be something completely different. When new trustees come in, they are encouraged to come in with a new idea of something that they would like to do. And it's not enforced that you start that idea, but it just means that you come to the table and you join the group by sharing something that you are passionate about doing. And perhaps other people around the table want to do that as well. And you might all trail off and do one person's idea, or you might come together and create a whole new thing and make that a new work stream. I think in general, at least for me, it's working a collective is kind of like having a support system for your ideas and your passions. And because people have ideas all the time, like there's people having ideas in their heads literally every day, but unless you actually action it and unless you make it happen, it doesn't mean anything. So I don't think that it's such a formal thing. I think when you are, like we said earlier, when you are amongst people that you trust and you have a common goal, then you're always happy to share an idea that you have and to discuss it and see how you can take it forward. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to this.
I would add that I think that it's kind of informal, or it can be informal in the, the tone of how you like address each other when you're working collectively. But I think that working in a collective is really, I think it's important, like trust, definitely, as you were saying. And I think that part of that trust is understanding that working collectively is kind of like you're a client and a facilitator at the same time. And I think it's really important to understand, like, what is the role that you take on when you're a client, and like what are your desires, what are your needs, and how do those need to be facilitated. And then at the same time understanding that as the facilitator, how can you meet those needs and like address them, and do you have the capacity to meet them? And like I think it's like a very delicate calibration, if you know what I mean. And I think if everyone understands like what their role is, what their capacity is, and also you have your baseline constitution in your collective, which is your shared goals, visions, and ethos, then it's easier to navigate those complexities.
Sorry. Oh. No, I have a question. Are you talking about in relation to each other inside of the collective, or when we talking to people outside of the collective?
I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not easy to just ask people and they will just, sometimes they don't know. So I was wondering, how do you manage to get this information out in an informal way?
Inside the collective? Or?
To understand what the motivations, what the needs, and what you're trying to contribute to, helps them achieve that.
I mean, sometimes like we just do really contrived things like workshop ice-breaking activities, like obviously we're designers, so we do things like drawings and like stuff like that, like silly activities like, you know, party games to kind of break down the initial layers of formality. But then at the same time you have like a record of maybe documents, artifacts, other kinds of things which you can refer to, like the meeting minutes, or maybe it could be recorded or something else, so that you can like go back and like amend maybe the way that you presented something, or like think again about, I don't know, what were the collective outcomes of the discussion.
I think we kind of each have this understanding that we have a responsibility toward each other to, say as much as we can what we think. And I think it helps.
I couldn't help sort of stepping in, because I realized that in some part the introduction is also about talking about education, and we're at the end of this discussion, but I think it's something that I really hope to broach over the next few weeks. I stepped in a year and a half ago as a director of an association, which is different to a collective. So, there's, in the collective, you come together very consciously. As an association, you have an affiliation. but maybe we're one of the few institutions that actually is supposed to have a democratic and horizontal structure. And the directorship allows me to not to perhaps just direct, but to accept responsibility for a set of collective decisions. And so much of what you said tonight is very powerful for me because it places a demand within an educational context to understand that people come with value, that the 900 students and don't even know how many hundreds of staff contribute to that collective conversation at a level that is beyond a conversation. And that becomes really difficult to manage. But there's a responsibility, yet again, to find the narrative within that then becomes the way in which we form a kind of collective action. And then the last thing is that you formed a collective by doing what you're doing here. And I think that's something to be applauded within the context of tonight. And I'm immensely impressed by it.
I had maybe a response to that. Just you mentioned the kind of collective being bigger than the sum of its parts. It's kind of, something I understood from what you said, and something I think we mentioned this week in our monthly meeting that we've not really thought about before is because we have, as I mentioned before, we have 2-year tenures, and so we don't want to be repeating ourselves. We don't want to be repeating ideas and things, and so we're kind of maybe in the next year or so going to think more about how our institutional memory kind of grows and evolves rather than kind of being replaced and dissolving. And so we've thought about, whether we archive all of our work online. Do we make a website? Do we spend loads of time doing that? But then we always kind of agree that we'd rather be doing the work than doing the work of documenting the work. But I don't know, maybe it needs to be more of a balance. But we try and the work tends to live beyond the people. We mentioned some projects that we've not worked on before, either of us, but it's Young Trustees, it's our work, but it's not. It's kind of beyond the people. So yeah, it's quite difficult to think about a collective when it goes beyond the people, I guess. But yeah, just a comment really, not a question or anything else to you guys, unless you guys have anything else to add on that.
Maybe for me, what it sounds like that it's a question of leadership, and not so much in terms of hierarchy, but how you, as a person, can lead whichever role you're in, and how that can be enabled. And I feel that in CSM often, and we talked about it, when you hire staff, it often comes a bit the conversation, what do you want to do? Come hang out with us for a bit so you understand who we are and where you might fit in and what your contribution might be. And that time of kind of giving space to each other is quite important for the person to find how they want to lead within the kind of structure. And I think that culture reproduces. Even being invited by students today, I've felt takes the edge off the space and it creates a different softness and a different kind of ground for conversation where you're just maybe more vulnerable or more kind of honest or whatever it is. And I think that reproduces, I feel, that's like a ripple. And I feel that for me, that's where the practice comes in, how you practice hospitality, openness, all this stuff. So, yeah. I think that's where learning takes place and how you navigate it. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to be conscious of time. And so in the famous words that Manager says at the end of every lecture, we can continue the conversation more informally over a drink. Yeah, thank you for coming, and I really encourage us to, if you guys have time to stick around, would love to continue this conversation even more softly and even more informally as the cameras are off and we can grab some snacks. Finally, just want to say thank you to my collaborators in this process. I'm feeling burnt out by my studio project, but this process was so helpful, and it's just wonderful to make sure that the work was just being done as we were working. So thank you to everyone that's put this thing together. And we have a wonderful rest of the events over the next term. Collaborative Models is the next lecture next Thursday. So yeah, thank you, and see you there.